Hey everyone, and welcome back to Civics Review. Today we're going to be looking at the evolution of voting rights, specifically at 6 amendments that change the way we vote in America. Well, let's get to it. America's history of voting has seen a lot of changes over time, and in this video we are going to be looking at the evolution of voting rights. Many of these changes come through what we call amendments to the Constitution, and amend means to change. Remember now, the Constitution establishes the 3 branches for our government and sort of sets up the rules for how it should work. And so when we make changes to that, we might be changing the wording or meaning of the Constitution, or be adding something to it completely different. Looking at these amendments that change voting rights is going to take us back in time to where our traditions come from. We'll take a quick detour to see the Civil War and the impacts of that on voting rights. We'll go through women's suffrage, and the final stop on today's journey will be the Vietnam War. The amendments we're going to be looking at can be broken down into 2 sets: Reconstruction Amendments 13, 14, and 15, and the Voting Rights Amendments 19, 24, and 26. Let's begin with Reconstruction. This is a very strange period of time for America. We've just gone through this thing called the Civil War. So the United States splits up into 2. Essentially, the southern states secede or break away and form their own country called the Confederate States of America. And the big issue here is the states' rights to have slavery versus the federal government saying, hey, you can't have slavery. And so we battle it out. We fight each other north versus south, and eventually the North wins, the Union as we call them. And the nation joins back together again, and we forget that the whole Confederate States of America thing ever happened. And the United States says, good, now that we've won this war, we are going to ban or abolish slavery forever. And we're going to change our Constitution to reflect that. Enter the 13th Amendment of the United States, which says, neither slavery or involuntary servitude shall exist in the United States. Now, even though this amendment doesn't specifically change voting rights, it obviously leads to some major changes. And the first question is, what is a citizen, or how do you become one, and do all people have equal protection? It's hard to believe this, but the original Constitution did not include the definition of what a citizen is, how to become one, or the fact that everyone has equal protection under the law. And so Congress quickly begins writing Amendment 14, which states, all citizens have equal protection under the law, and oh hey, this is what a citizen is, and freed slaves are citizens. Therefore, they have equal protection under the law. And in order to ensure that they had equality under the law, they were guaranteed the right to vote. And so Amendment 15 states, the right of citizens to vote shall not be denied based on race or color. Of course, that means before the 15th Amendment, African Americans could not vote. So you're probably asking yourselves, who could vote back then? Certainly not women, and in fact, back in the very beginning of the United States, you had to be not only white and not only a man, but you had to own property. I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. Let's go back and look at a voting history recap of where voting traditions come from. We're going to start in ancient Greece, the birthplace of democracy, and where voting traditions first started. And in ancient Greece, only men could vote, but specifically men who completed their military training. Even men that did not do their training, women, younger people, slaves or former slaves, and people who lived in Greece but were not considered citizens could not vote. That's a very small percentage of the population that can actually cast a vote in their government. Fast forward in history and arrive at the UK, and you'll see that the voting traditions remain relatively the same. However, instead of military training being a requirement, instead it's land ownership. So in the UK, people who are wealthy and own land are able to participate in Parliament. And this leaves out quite a few people, namely people who can't afford to have land, women, young people, and of course slaves, and moving across the sea to the new colonies, which would one day become the United States, we also bring our traditions of voting with us. Now, eventually in America, the land owning requirement for voting sort of goes away. State by state, they stop doing this, leaving white men who are not wealthy enough to own land able to vote. Now, we know that the 13th Amendment is written, and that frees the slaves. And Amendment 15 guarantees you can't be denied the right to vote based on your race or color. And so that leaves more people represented in government. Are we missing anyone here? Oh, right, women. Women still couldn't vote. A lot of them were surprised they were not included in the 15th Amendment. So, we're going to switch gears now to the second batch of amendments we need to know, known as the Civil Rights Amendments. Amendment 15, which is a Reconstruction Amendment, was written in 1870, and this made women kind of upset. Women like Susan B. Anthony in 1872 tried to go vote, and when they stopped her, she immediately quoted the 14th and 15th Amendment because she knows her civics, and she said, hey, we all have equal rights, and you can't deny me based on my race. Therefore, I should be able to vote. Well, she was immediately arrested, and she wasn't the only one, okay? Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Sojourner Truth, a lot of women started fighting even harder for their rights to vote. 50 years after the 15th Amendment is written, finally women get the 19th Amendment, which states the right to vote shall not be denied on account of sex. Well, it took until 1920, but finally, regardless of gender, race, or wealth, everyone in America can now vote. Okay, that's it for now.
Thanks so much for sticking to the video.
If only that were the case. Unfortunately, the 15th Amendment was largely ignored when it first came out. There was segregation in the Deep South, and they tried to find ways to disenfranchise African Americans or newly freed slaves, and disenfranchise basically meaning to deprive someone of their right or their privilege, in this case to vote. And they came up with all kinds of crazy ways to prevent African Americans from voting. The first of which was a literacy test, meaning if you couldn't read this test, which was very subjective and very difficult, then you could not vote. Another way to disenfranchise African Americans was poll taxes. You had to pay in order to vote, and for newly freed slaves who were just trying to make it on their own financially, this was a back-breaking tax that they couldn't afford to pay. And then there was just outright police beatings or saying, hey, you're not coming in here to vote. We're not going to be silly or tricky with poll taxes or a literacy test. We're just going to hit you with sticks until you go away and don't vote, which largely went against the 14th and 15th Amendment. And so you have these modern day civil heroes like Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and even Malcolm X, who fought for their rights, of which they already had guaranteed in the Constitution. They were fighting for the 14th and 15th Amendment, the very same amendments giving them equal protection under the law and allowing them to vote not based on their race or color. And so with their efforts and their help, we have the 24th Amendment now, which states, the right of citizens to vote shall not be denied based on the failure to pay poll taxes. We cannot disenfranchise someone to vote just because they're poor or even if they're wealthy. It does not matter. Everyone has a vote in America. Okay, that's it for now.
Thanks so much for sticking to the video.
Well, we did say everyone can vote, and that means all men and all women, all races. So what's going on with the 26th Amendment? Well, we are going to talk about something called the Vietnam War, and that was a nasty one. In fact, Selective Service needed to be enacted to draft young men to go fight. Selective Service is an obligation of male citizens in the United States. They have to sign up, and that means if they choose your name, you have to go fight. They're going to train you up and send you abroad. There is a slight issue here when it comes to the age of voting. The voting age during this time is 21, but you can be chosen for Selective Service at the age of 18, and this was a major point of contention. A lot of these young men said, hey, if I had a voice in my government, I would have not voted for this president, I would have not voted to go to this war, and I didn't have a say, but I've got to sign up and put my life on the line. That doesn't seem right, and a lot of people joined them in this fight. It was hard to beat that kind of logic. The government kind of shrugged their shoulders and went, you're right. this isn't fair. And so with the 26th Amendment, they changed the voting age to 18 years old. And there you have it. That's the entire evolution of voting rights in America, starting way back from only white men that could vote. And if you think about it, when you go through the timeline, it all makes sense. It starts out with the 13th Amendment. We free the slaves. And if we have the 13th Amendment, then we've got to make sure everyone's equal and protected under the law. That's the 14th Amendment. And then, hey, wait a minute. We got to make sure these guys can vote. And so the 15th Amendment allows anyone of any race to vote as long as you're a man. And the women were like, whoa, what's going on with this? So the 19th Amendment guarantees all genders can vote. And then remember, they weren't really following the 15th Amendment. And so they put an end to poll taxes and disenfranchisement from voting with the 24th Amendment. And then the young men who were being drafted said, hey, wait a minute. We're fighting here and dying for our country, and we can't even vote. You've got to change the voting age to 18, and that is the 26th and final amendment. What's the impact of allowing all these different kinds of people to vote is that our government starts to change from just white, wealthy men who owned land to now having diverse representation in our government. Okay, that's it for now. Thanks so much for sticking to the end of my video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. We'll make more videos soon.